The Duke of Netherby came up the ladder into the drying loft at 4 in the morning with his hat in his hand, and he had never once come up that ladder with his hat in his hand before. Cecily Larkham was on her knees at the edge of the hair, with her sleeves turned back past the elbow. The load had been on since noon. It had gone through its sweat and settled in the last hour, and the smell coming up through the horsehair cloth was the smell she waited all day for, green and sharp and sweet underneath, like nothing else in the world. "Mind the third rung," she said. "It gives. You have told me so before. I'll tell you till it's mended." He came up the rest of the way and stood at the edge of the hair, where the heat off the load met him, and turned his face wet in a moment. Above them, the cowl swung a quarter turn on its rack, hunting the wind, and the fire under the kiln drew and breathed. "I have a thing to ask you," he said, "and I have already made a poor job of the beginning of it. Then make a poor job of the middle. Marry me." Down in the garden, the pickers' fires had gone out, and there was no light anywhere except the red glow at the kiln mouth, and the lantern hung on its nail. She sat back on her heels with the scuppet across her knees. She did not answer him, and the load went on drying, because a load will. 11 weeks before that, she had been standing in a long gallery in London, with her hands folded in front of her, being looked at. She had been sent up to court at 19 because her mother's cousin, Mr. Garrow, had calculated what a well-spoken girl with a straight back might be worth to a man in the hop trade who wanted better company than the hop trade gave him. He had bought her 3 gowns and a hired maid and a place near a woman who knew everybody. He had told her plainly what the money was for. She had never once pretended she did not know. What she had not calculated, and Garrow had not either, was that the king would notice her at all. He was a courteous man in the way that costs nothing. He spoke to her twice about the weather in Kent, and a third time about nothing, and the 4th time he did not speak about anything. "You are not a fool," he said. "I have watched you not be one for a month. I have a great deal of practice, sir. There is a house at Kew that stands empty, and is a very pretty house. I know what it is for." "Then you know it is not a hard bargain." "It is not a hard bargain," she said. "It is only one I am not selling." He took his hand off her arm. He was not angry, or not in any way a person could take hold of and answer. He said he was sorry to hear it, and he bowed, and he went on down the gallery, and that was the whole of it. It took less time than laying a fire. She was out of her lodgings in 9 days. Nobody put her out. The woman who knew everybody had a headache, and then a longer headache, and then an engagement. Her invitations stopped the way water stops when a sluice is dropped somewhere upstream, quietly, out of sight. Garrow came to her on the 10th day and sat down without taking his hat off. £340, he said. "That is what you have cost me since the spring. I do not say it to shame you. I say it because you are the only one of my investments that can hear me say it. I hear you. A girl who refuses a king is not thought virtuous, Cecily. She is thought to have refused because she was asked for less than she wanted. That is what is being said in 3 houses I could name, and by Sunday it will be said in 30. Then it will be said. You will go into Kent, he said. I factor for the Netherby Gardens, and there is a chamber over the stables, and nobody in it. You will be quiet there through the picking. By Michaelmas I will have found a man who will take you, and he will not be young, and you will thank me." She looked at the window for a while. There was a barrow going past with a wheel that wanted grease, and she listened to it all the way down the street. "I'll go," she said. "I'll work while I'm there, and I'll earn my bread and not be a charge on you. But I'll not be sold twice. Not by him and not by you. That is my whole condition, and it is not to be argued with. You have no condition to make." "I have that one," she said. She went down into Kent on the outside of a wagon, with her box between her feet, through Bromley, and out past the last of the brick, and the country opened and turned into poles, acre after acre of them, 12 feet high, strung and laced with bine, and the cones hanging in the green shade so thick that the whole hill breathed out at her as the road came round it. She had not smelled that smell since she was 14 years old. She put her hand over her mouth, which was a thing nobody saw, and she was glad of that, because she would not have been able to explain it. The wagon set her down in the yard at Netherby at 6 in the evening, in the second week of the picking, and the first thing she smelled after the hops was a load burning. She knew it before her feet were properly under her. It came off the nearest oast in a thin, sour thread laid over the sweetness, the smell of leaf going past dry and beginning to catch, and she left her box standing in the middle of the yard and went in through the kiln door without asking anybody's leave. An old man was sitting on a stool at the fire with his hands on his knees. "Draw it," she said. "Who are you?" "Draw the fire and get the load off. It's 4 hours past." "It's an hour off yet." "It is not." She was up the ladder by then. The heat in the loft stood on her like a hand. She took a cone off the middle of the hair, not the edge, and bent the stalk, and it snapped like a dry twig, and the little seeds ran out into her palm, and when she rubbed the leaf between her fingers, it went to powder, and the yellow came off dead and dull instead of sticky. "The middle's done." "The middle's been done since 3. Everything you put over that fire from now is money going up the cowl." The old man came up the ladder a great deal faster than a man of his years had any business to. That was Silas Pollard, who had kept the Netherby kilns for 41 years, and whose wife had died in April, and who had lately begun to find that a smell he had known all his life would not come to him when he called it. "Get the scuppets," he said. They had the load off in 20 minutes, the 2 of them and a boy at the door, and spread thin on the cooling floor to come back to itself in the night air. Then Silas sat down on the top of the ladder and looked at his hands. "How much of it did I lose?" "A quarter of the colour," she said. "No more. They'll sell. They'll not sell as high as they should have." "How do you come to know?" "My mother was Meacham's daughter, from the hill the other side of that wood. I stood on a stool at her father's kiln before I could read. Then he died, and the ground went, and I went to a school where they taught me to walk with a book on my head. And you're the one from London." "I am the one from London." He turned his head and spat carefully out of the door, and then he said, "It's a poor year to be sent anywhere," which was the first kind thing anybody had said to her since the gallery. She met the Duke of Netherby the next morning at the door of the store, where he was carrying one end of a pocket of last year's stock, with the wagoner on the other end, in his shirt sleeves, because a man had gone lame, and the wagon would not wait. He was 38. He had a plain face and a great deal of quiet in it, and he set the pocket down and looked at her the way a man looks at a bill he has not opened. "You are Garrow's cousin?" "I am. He wrote that you were to be kept out of the way and given nothing to do. He is often wrong about what people are to be given. Silas tells me you took a load off my kiln last night without asking anybody." "I did." "Why?" "Because by the time I had found somebody to ask, it would have been ash," she said. "You may take the value of the load out of my keep if you think I was wrong. I'd want it in writing what the value was, mind, because I know to a shilling, and I don't think you do." Behind her, the wagoner made a noise that he turned into a cough. The Duke looked at her for a long moment, and something at the corner of his mouth moved and was put away again. "Silas is 67, he said, "and he has been telling me since June that his nose is gone, and I have been telling him it is not, because I did not want it to be. Can you dry hops?" "I can dry hops." "Then dry them," he said, and picked up his end of the pocket. Garrow's letter came on the Saturday. She read it standing in the yard with the wind pulling at it. It named the 29th of September, and it named a widower in the malt trade at Rochester, who was 61 and wanted a quiet woman. And it said the settlement was already drawn. That night, the Duke came up the ladder at 4 in the morning with his hat in his hand, and asked her to marry him. And she sat back on her heels and let a long time go by. "Say the rest of it," she said at last. "There is no rest of it." "There is. You are not a man who does anything without the whole of it worked out first, and I would rather hear it than guess at it." He turned his hat round once. "Your cousin can take you off this ground on the 29th, and I cannot stop him, because you are nothing here, and a man may fetch away his own ward from a stranger's stable loft, and the law will hold the ladder for him. If you were my wife, he could not come within a mile of you. And you would have a dryer." "And I would have a dryer," he said. "I have 40 acres in Bine, and one old man who cannot smell, and a name on my pockets that lost 6pence a hundredweight last year, and I do not know why. Yes, I would have a dryer." "Thank you," she said. "That is the first honest offer I have had in a 12-month, and I am obliged to you for it, and my answer is no." He did not argue. She thought afterwards that she had never in her life said no to a man who did not argue. "I'll tell you why, and then we'll not speak of it again," she said. "In April, I was worth a settlement to a man because of my back and my voice. In September, I am worth a wedding to you because of my nose. It is the same bargain in a different coat, and I have said what I said. I'll not be sold twice. That is not what It is what it is, whatever it was meant for." She stood up and shook the strig off her apron. "Here is what I'll do instead. I'll dry your crop, every load of it, to the last pocket pressed and stamped, and I'll not ask a penny above my keep, and Silas's wage kept whole. And on the day the last pocket goes on the wagon, I'll walk down that lane, and you'll not ask me again between now and then. And on the 29th. The 29th is my affair." The cowl turned above them. He put his hat on, which was somehow worse than holding it. "Very well," he said, and went down the ladder, and remembered the third rung. And she heard him say something to himself in the dark of the kiln that she did not catch. The Netherby Gardens ran over 2 south-facing hills and a piece of low ground by the stream, and in the second week of September they held 43 acres of bine that had to be off the poles and through a kiln inside 3 weeks, or be worth nothing at all. That was the whole shape of her life for those weeks, and it was a shape she knew. There were 3 oasts in the yard. The near one and the middle one worked. The third stood at the end with its door shut and its cowl seized solid on the rack, and there were nettles growing at the foot of it as high as a man's waist. Nobody spoke of the third oast. Silas told her only that it had come with the Hallowe'es ground 9 years before, and had not been lit since, and when she asked why, he said, "Ask him or don't ask him," and went to see to the charcoal. 240 Londoners came down for the picking every year, and lived in the huts along the top lane, whole families of them, and they picked into canvas bins on frames, and were paid by the bushel, measured out by a man with a basket. Her days ran from the first poke of green hops carried in at 7, until the last of the cooling floor was raked at midnight, and her nights ran on the kiln, because a load does not care what o'clock it is. The tally book lived on a shelf by the kiln door, and by the end of the first week the Duke had got into the way of coming for it himself at 11 at night instead of sending, and standing while she read him the day. 62 bushels off the low ground, and 81 off the middle hill, she said. The low ground is going over. Another 3 days of this sun, and the cones will shatter on the pole before they reach the bin. Then we pull the low ground first. You pull the low ground the day after tomorrow, because I have 2 kilns, and I can dry 90 bushels in a day and a night, and not 1 bushel more. And if you bring me 140, I shall have 40 of them standing in a heap in this yard, heating themselves to a mould. He leaned on the doorframe with his arms folded. "Tell me the whole of it," he said. "Not the part you think I will follow." So she told him, wiping her hands on her apron, in the dark, with the fire making a noise behind her. "They come off the bine wet as a dog," she said. "They go on, the hair a foot deep, and no more, and level. Level matters. A hollow anywhere draws all the heat to itself, and the rest of the load sits cold and wet while you stand there, congratulating yourself. Then charcoal, never wood, whatever it costs you, because wood smoke goes into the leaf, and a brewer will taste it in March, and never buy your name again. Then brimstone on the fire the first hour, a handful, no more, and it holds the colour bright. Then for 4 hours you leave it alone. 4 hours doing nothing. 4 hours doing the hardest thing there is. The top of the load runs with wet. That's the sweat coming up out of the whole depth of it, and every man born wants to turn it and let it out faster. Turn it then, and you carry the wet back down into what's already dried, and you have to do the lot again. So you sit, you keep the fire even, and you sit. And after? The load falls. You can see it go down a hand's breadth on the hair, all at once, like a chest, letting out its breath. And then the heat comes up, and it's an hour or 2 hours, and it's finished. You take a cone off the middle of the load, never the edge, because the edge lies to you. You bend the strig, the little stalk. If it bends, it's not ready. If it snaps clean, and the seed shakes out, and the leaf rustles under your thumb like paper. Draw the fire. Then off with the scuppets on to the cooling floor, thin as you can spread it, and they lie there all night, taking the damp back out of the air. Back out of the air. After all that. After all that, she said. They've got to come back tough, or they go to dust in the press, and a pocket of dust is a pocket of nothing. That's the trade. Dry them slowly, then let them come back. You cannot hurry either half of it. You can only spoil it. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he had gone. How long since anybody in this yard knew that? He said. Silas knows it. Silas has always known it. He only can't smell the difference now between the 4th hour and the 6th, and he's too proud to say so twice. He said it to me in June. Then that is once, she said. And once from a man like that is the whole of it said. The pickers were a nation of their own along the top lane, and they took no notice of her for 4 days. On the 5th, she was crossing behind the huts at 9 at night, and heard a woman crying in the way people cry when they mean not to be heard. And she stopped and went back. Dorcas Ferris was 31 years old and had come down from Southwark with 2 sisters, and she was sitting on the step of the hut with her hands turned up on her knees. Hop-picking blackens the hands and cracks them at the fingertips, and hers had gone past, cracked into something that made Cecily's stomach turn over. "It's nothing," said Dorcas. "It's every year." "Not like that, it isn't." She sat down on the step. "Have you been picking with them like this?" 6 bushels short today. I can't get the speed on." Cecily went back down to the yard and up to the chamber over the stables, and came back with a pot of goose grease and a clean shift torn into strips and a bottle of the spirit they used for the lamps, and she washed the woman's hands with the spirit, which hurt, and greased them, and bound the 2 worst fingers with strips, and told her to keep them bound and pick with the other hand slower for 2 days. "You'll be short a shilling and 4 pence at the week's end," she said. "I'll make it up out of mine, and there's no discussion in it." "You're the one they say the king." "I am the one they say," said Cecily. "Keep them bound." She did not know that the Duke had come up the lane behind her to speak to the pole-pullers about the morning, and had stopped where the corner of the hut hid him, and had gone away again without saying anything to anybody. He walked back down through the gardens in the dark. What he felt, walking down, was chiefly shame, and it was not the sort of shame that has anything to do with the person who caused it. He had lived 9 years in a place where nobody did anything for anybody without a reason, and he had begun to think that was how the world was arranged. And here was a woman with a bottle of lamp spirit proving it was not at 9 o'clock at night, in front of nobody at all. 3 nights later, she went into the far shed at the end of the store for a spare hair, and the smell in there stopped her a moment. It was hops, but old ones, and something cheesy underneath the way hops go when they have sat a year and lost their yellow. There were 40 or 50 pockets stacked along the wall in the dark, and she put her hand on one going past and thought, without troubling herself about it, that Garrow kept his own stock in a very warm shed for a man so careful about everything else. She wanted the hair, and she found the hair, and she went back to the kiln. The step outside the kiln door had been rotten since she came, and the 3rd rung of the ladder gave under the foot. On the Thursday morning, she came out at first light, and there was a new oak tread on the step, and a rail along the ladder at the height of her own hand, and the third rung new. Nobody said anything about it. She asked Silas, and Silas said the carpenter had been in the yard on Wednesday, and had done what he was set to do, and looked at the fire. She started keeping the hours of each load in a little book, ruled in columns in ink. On at 11:30, fell at 4, off at 7:10, weighed 9 pockets 3/4. The Duke found her writing it in the doorway with the book on her knee at 4:30 in the morning at the end of that week, and stood watching her do it for some while before she noticed him. "The middle kiln's cowl is a half-turn slow," she said, without looking up. "It wants greasing on the rack. It's costing me 20 minutes a load. I'll have it done. What is the third oast to you? Nothing to me. It's a kiln standing empty in a year, when I could dry another 30 bushels a day if it were lit. And there are nettles up to my waist against the door, and nobody in this yard will say a word about it. So it is a great deal to me, and none of my business, and both of those at once." He came in and sat down on the sawing stool by the charcoal, which he had never done before, and put his hands together between his knees. His name was Hallowes, he said. The ground it stands on was his. He was 51, and I had known him since I was 7 years old, and he taught me to swim in the stream at the bottom of that hill. You needn't. I would rather do it badly now than have Silas do it well when I am not here. He looked at the fire. He got into debt. Not through drink and not through cards. Through 11 years of buying land, he could not work, and believing every man who told him the price of hops would hold. By the spring of that year, he owed £9,000, and had hidden the half of it from everyone, including himself. "And you paid it?" "I paid it," he said. "Every penny in one morning, and I was so pleased with myself that I could hardly sit still. And then I set my conditions, because I was 30, and I knew what was wanted. He was to sell this ground to me. He was to put off 11 servants. He was to live on 400 a year in his own house, and bring me his accounts on the 1st of every month, and sit in my library while I went through them. He agreed to it. He agreed to all of it. He was grateful. He said in that room that I had saved him. The Duke turned his hat over on his knee. He brought me his accounts on the 1st of the month for 22 months. I made him account for a gardener's boy once. I remember doing it. And on the 23rd of March, he took ship for Lisbon to a cousin he had not seen in 30 years, and he died there of a fever 11 days after he landed, and he had left no letter for anybody, and I have never known from that day to this whether he went because he was ill or whether he went to get away from me. The fire settled. Out in the yard, somebody was moving a wagon. "You were not wrong about the money," she said. "No, I was exactly right about the money. I've never in my life been so right about anything." He stood up and put his hat on. "Nobody has lit that kiln since. Good night, Miss Larkham." She sat where she was for a good while after he had gone, with her book open on her knee and the ink drying, and then she got up and turned the load, because it was time. There was a cat in the near oast that lived on the warm boards above the fire, and had no name, and would not be touched by anybody. On the Sunday, when the pickers rested, and only one kiln was on, the Duke came in at 9 at night and found Cecily lying on her back on the cooling floor among the hops, with the cat sitting on her stomach. "It has never once come to me," he said. "That's because you want it to." That is a foolish thing to say about a cat. It is a true thing to say about a cat. She sat up, and the cat went off her lap in a great show of grievance. "Sit down. Silas has gone to his sister's, and there's an hour before the load falls, and there's nothing at all to be done in it." He sat down on the boards with his back against the wall, which was not a thing Dukes did, and she pushed a heap of dried hops over towards him. "Now," she said, "you've told me twice this week that they smell bitter. They do not smell bitter. Bitter is what happens to them in a copper. That is a sweet smell with an edge on it, and if you were not a man who had eaten too many dinners, you would know it. I have eaten a great many dinners. There it is." "They smell," he said, taking up a handful and putting his face in it with more seriousness than she expected, "like a green thing that has been shut in a hot room with an apothecary." She laughed out loud, which she had not done since April, and put her hand over her mouth, and took it away again. "That is nearer than anything I have heard in 10 years, she said. "Now shut your eyes." "Why?" "Because I'm going to prove something, and you are going to be beaten by a woman on your own cooling floor. Shut them." He shut them. She set 3 handfuls on the boards in front of him, from the middle hill, from the low ground, and from a poke of the small coned sort along the lane by the wood, and made him name them. He got the low ground right, because the low ground smelled of the low ground. He got the other 2 wrong twice each. "You are looking?" she said. "I am not looking." "You are looking, because you named the small one after I moved my hand, and I moved my hand at nothing at all." "That," he said, opening his eyes, "is a shabby way to conduct an experiment." "It is a shabby way to conduct a duke," she said. "Again?" They went at it for the better part of an hour. He improved, and then got worse, and blamed the cat, which had come back and settled itself squarely on the 3rd heap. He told her that a man who had been thrown from a horse at 11 and had his nose broken twice could not fairly be expected to compete, and she said that the nose in question was clearly ornamental and had been from the start. He said she was insolent. She said she was accurate. He said the 2 were not always different, and she said that, in her experience, they were never different at all. At the end of it, he was sitting with his knees up and his head back against the wall, and she was sorting the heaps back into their pokes, and neither of them had won anything, and no fact of any kind had changed in the world. 10:30, she said at last. "That's the hour of it. Must you go up?" "I must go up." She stood over him with a poke on her hip. "You may come and be beaten again next Sunday if there's a kiln on." "There will be a kiln on." "There will be a kiln on," she agreed, "because I am running 2 of them at 120 bushels a day. And I have no notion how you propose to keep the Sabbath, and I would be obliged if you would stop looking at me like that and pass me the other poke." He passed her the other poke. The wagoner was Tam Bicknell, who had driven for the Gardens for 19 years, and who had not spoken 6 words to her that were not about the weight of a load. On the Tuesday, he came to the kiln door in the middle of the afternoon, and stood there turning his hat, which in that yard was the mark of a man about to do something difficult. Mr. Bicknell, I've been putting your pockets on the wagon in the order the shed gives 'em to me, he said. You told me a fortnight since to load the earliest pressed at the tail, so they'd come off first at the market. I didn't do it. I know you didn't. You never said. I said it once. Saying it twice makes it a quarrel, and I hadn't the time for a quarrel. He looked at the ground for a while. My brother went for a dryer at Yalding, and he could never tell me the reason for anything he did. He just done it, and looked at you as if you was slow. He put his hat on, and took it off again. You told me why, that day, about the market. I've been thinking on it a fortnight. I'll load 'em how you say from now, and I'd take it kindly if you'd tell me the reason for the rest of it as we go. I'll tell you the reason for every single thing in this yard, Mr. Bicknell, till you're sick of the sound of me. I? He said. Well, and went back to his horses, and from that day he called her Miss Larkham, with the name in it, in front of everybody. On the following morning, she found a horn lantern hanging on the nail inside the kiln door, glazed and shut, in place of the open candle she had been carrying among 50 hundredweight of dry leaf for 3 weeks. The brimstone box had been moved to the shelf at her elbow. There was a chair set at the head of the cooling floor, with a board across the arms, at the exact height of her own hand, for the writing of the book. Nobody said anything about any of it, then or afterwards. The wind backed into the southwest on the 15th of September, and by 4 in the afternoon, the sky over the low ground had gone the colour of a bruise. They had 130 bushels, picked and in, because she had begged for it, because the low ground was going over. 90 of them she could dry that night. The other 40 stood in pokes in the corner of the store, and green hops in a heap begin to heat themselves within a day, and are cheesed and worthless within 2. At 8 o'clock, the rain came across the hill in a wall. At 8:20, the cowl of the middle oast, which had been greased on Thursday and was turning free, swung hard round on a gust, jammed its vane against the rack, and stopped dead, facing into the wind. Cecily was up the loft ladder when she felt it, before she heard it. The draught went over and turned back down on itself, and the smoke came up through the hair in a grey blanket and lay on the load. Silas! She was down the ladder with her skirt in her fist. The middle's smoking. Draw it now, and get the load off and out in the rain if you have to. It's tainted where it stands. She came out into the yard, and the Duke was already crossing it with his coat off, and the rain flattening his shirt to him. How bad? The load's gone. It's the roof I want. If that cowl stops there, the kiln's no good to me tonight, and I lose the whole of the low ground by Friday. Have you a ladder that reaches? I have a ladder that reaches. Then it's you and me, because Silas is 67, and Tam is broad as a door, and that roof is old. They got the long ladder up against the round of the oast, with 3 men holding the foot of it in the mud. She went up first, because she knew what she was looking at, and he came up behind her, and the wind on the roundel was a live thing that pushed at the small of her back, and let go, and pushed again. The vane had gone over and wedged its iron on the rack, where the rack had rusted proud. She lay along the tiles with her arm through the frame of the cowl, and could not shift it a hair. Both hands, he shouted. "Give me the bar, and take my belt." "Take your what?" "My belt, or I go off this roof, and you will have to explain it to Silas." She took a fistful of his belt in her left hand and braced her boot against the coping, and he put the bar in under the iron and hauled, and it gave with a shriek, and the cowl came round so fast it knocked him flat along the tiles and her with him. And they lay there in the rain, with the cowl swinging free above them, hunting the wind, and neither of them able to speak for laughing, which was not a thing either of them would have called laughing at any other hour of their lives. Then they went down and worked. They drew the middle kiln and carried the tainted load out on hurdles into the rain, and left it, 40 pounds of money lying in the yard turning black. They loaded the middle again clean, and at 10:30 she stood in the middle of the store, with a lantern in her hand, and 40 bushels of green hops in pokes at her back, and looked at him and did not say it. He said it. "Get the nettles down." They opened the 3rd oast at 11 o'clock at night, 9 years to the summer since anyone had crossed the sill. The hair was rotten in 2 places, and they sewed it with twine by lantern light. There was a jackdaw's nest in the throat of it 1 foot deep, and he went up inside and brought it out in his arms, and stood there holding the wreck of it, while the rain came in through the open door. Then he set it down outside the wall, out of the wet, which was a foolish thing to do with a nest 9 years dead. And he came back in and asked her how much charcoal. They lit it at midnight. It drew like a chimney out of the old world. They ran 3 kilns until the light came. Tam carried, and Silas kept the fires, and Dorcas Ferris came down the lane at 1 in the morning with 11 other Londoners who had nothing to gain by it, and picked green hops out of pokes, and spread them on the hairs 1 foot deep and level, because Cecily stood at the top of the ladder, and told them what level meant. Nobody declared anything. At 5 o'clock, the Duke came up into the loft of the old oast with 2 cups of tea, and they sat on the boards at the edge of the hair in the heat, and the load fell in front of them, going down a hand's breadth all at once, like a chest letting out its breath, and neither of them said one word about it to the other. "Wherever this finds you tonight, is the weather doing anything worth listening to? I hope you are somewhere dry, with your feet up, and nothing of yours out in it. Stay a while longer if you can. The season is only half through. By the Thursday, the low ground was in, all of it, and dried, and 9 of the 11 Londoners had been paid 1 shilling extra out of the Duke's own hand, and Silas had been asleep for 14 hours. Cecily and the Duke pressed a pocket together that afternoon, because there was nobody else standing up. The press stood over a hole in the floor of the store, and the pocket hung down through it, and a man got into the mouth of it and trod the hops down, while another shovelled. He got into the pocket, a Duke up to his thighs in a sack, treading, red in the face, with the yellow dust of it all over his shirt and in his hair and on his eyelashes. "There is no dignity available to me in this," he said. "None whatever." "You are not shovelling." "I am watching," she said. "It is the best morning I have had since April, and I do not propose to hurry it." She shovelled. He trod. When it was full to the mark, she gave him her hand to get him out of the pocket, and he came out with his weight on her arm, and stood in the dust holding it a moment longer than the getting out required, and let go. "The stamp," she said. "Netherby, this parish, this year. Silas keeps the iron in the... I know where he keeps the iron." Garrow came on the Saturday, in a hired chaise, in a good coat. He walked the store first, with a book under his arm, and then he came out, and found her in the doorway of the near oast, and he stood at a little distance with the sun behind him. "You are brown as a gypsy," he said. "I am out of doors. You are a dryer. My mother's cousin's girl is a dryer at 11 shillings a week." "9, she said. 11 is Silas." Garrow smiled at that. He had a way of smiling that made whatever had been said seem a little childish. "The settlement is drawn," he said. "The gentleman at Rochester has asked twice about your health. He is not a monster, Cecily. He is a dull man with 300 a year in malt, and a house with a good staircase, and he will be dead in a dozen years, and you will have the staircase. I have told you my answer. You have told me nothing that signifies, because you have nothing to tell it with." He came a step closer. "Listen to me. What is being said of you is not going to stop being said. It has had all summer to bed in. It is said that the king had you and put you down. It is said in the borough by men who buy hops from me, and I have to stand there and hear it and say nothing, because to defend a thing is to make people ask why it wants defending. That is your difficulty. It is your difficulty, and it will be your difficulty in this yard by Christmas." He looked past her at the kiln. "You think this is a life? You are 30 feet from a man who has not spoken above 4 sentences to any woman in 9 years, and he has bought you a lantern, and you have let yourself begin to think something. Don't trouble to deny it. I don't ask you to. I only tell you what it is worth. He will keep you till the last pocket is stamped, and then in November there will be nothing to dry, and he will want somebody to sit at the other end of a table for 40 years, and it will not be a woman who was sent down here in disgrace on the outside of a wagon. He will settle something on you. That is what men like him do. He will be very generous, and he will not be able to look at you while he says it. The rain of the week before had washed the yard, and there was a smell of wet ash off the tainted load still lying at the wall. She stood in the doorway with her arms folded, and let him get to the end of it. "You may be right," she said. "I am right." "You may be. Now I'll tell you a thing you did not know when you came into this yard this morning, and then you may go and drink your tea." She nodded at the far shed. "You keep 50 pockets in that shed at the end of the store, and it stands against the south wall, and it is the warmest building on this ground. Hops keep in the cold and the dark and the dry. Any child on this hill could tell you so. You have kept stock in a warm shed for 6 years, cousin, and you are the most careful man I ever met with a shilling. It has troubled me for a fortnight." She had not the smallest notion, saying it, of what she had said. She only saw that his face did something before he put it away, and that when he answered her, his voice had gone up a little, and that he did not look at the shed. That shed is dry as a bone. It's warm as a bakehouse. "You are talking about a trade you learned at a kitchen stool," said Garrow, and turned, and went to find the Duke. And it was the first time in her life she had ever seen him leave a conversation before he had finished it. He was in the yard again an hour later, in company, waiting on his chaise, with the Duke there, and Tam, and 2 of the pole-pullers within hearing. "Your Grace has been very good to my cousin," he said, "and I would not have her presume on it. She has a habit of forming attachments above her." He said it lightly, the way a man makes a small joke about his own family, and he was on the step of the chaise before it had properly landed. The 19th was hot and still, and the low ground stood in stubble and poles, with the bine lying dead along the alleys. She walked out along the top of the middle hill in the afternoon, because the kilns were both between loads, and there was 1 hour in the day with nothing in it. From up there she could see the whole of it, the 3 oasts with 2 cowls turning, and the 3rd one turning too now. The store, the huts, the wagon on the road with her pockets on it, the stream, the hill on the other side of the wood, where her grandfather had kept his kilns, and where she had stood on a stool at 4 years old. She sat down on the bank with her arms round her knees, and made herself look at it squarely, because she had never yet been made a fool of by anything she had looked at squarely. It was true, what Garrow had said. Not the ugly part. He would not settle money on her, and be unable to meet her eye. He was better than that, and she knew what he was. But the shape of it was true, and she had been walking round the shape of it for a fortnight, pretending she could not see it. Everything he had done for her was a thing done for a dryer. The lantern was for a woman carrying a flame among dry leaf. The rail was for a woman on a ladder at 4 in the morning. The chair was for a woman who wrote in a book at the head of a cooling floor, and the mended step was for a woman who used that step 90 times a day, and every one of those was the kindness of a careful man to the person keeping his crop alive. He had asked her to marry him in the same voice he used for the charcoal order, and when she had told him what it was, he had not denied it. He had said, "Yes, I would have a dryer." And there was the other thing under it, which was worse because it was gentler. He was a man who had ruined somebody by being useful to him. He would not do it twice, but he would go on paying for it forever. And here was a woman on his ground with nowhere to go, and a cousin selling her, and a man like that would see a debt in it. She had been feeling the warmth of a fire that was lit for somebody else 9 years ago. A yellow hammer went along the hedge in 3 short flights. Down in the yard, somebody dropped a hurdle. She named it to herself then, in plain words, sitting on the bank in the sun, because a thing not named goes on working in the dark. She was in love with him. She had probably been in love with him since he sat down on the sawing stool and told her about Heloise with his hands between his knees. She would never have him, because what he wanted was a pair of hands and a nose, and because in November there would be nothing left to dry, and because a man does not marry the woman the whole borough says the king put down. She sat with it for as long as she could stand, and then she got up and beat the dust off her skirt and went down the hill, because the near kiln wanted loading at 4, and it was 10 minutes to. Mr. Prideaux came on the Monday from the brewhouse in Southwark that had bought Netherby hops for 30 years, and he brought a pocket back on his own cart, and he had it cut open in the middle of the yard in front of everybody. 11 pockets, he said. Netherby stamp, this parish, this year. My master's man opened the third one down and put his arm in it to the shoulder, and this is what came out. He turned the mouth of it back like a stocking. The face of it was bright and good. Underneath, a hand's depth down, the colour went to brown, and the smell that came out of it was cheese and old rope. The yard had come round. 20 people, perhaps 30, and Silas at the front with his hat in his hand, and Tam and Dorcas at the back by the store wall, and Garrow standing at Prideaux's elbow in his good coat, having ridden over from Maidstone within the hour, which nobody remarked upon at the time. "The excise has been told," said Prideaux. "That is not my doing, and I could not stop it. Adulterated stock under a stamped name is a felony, Your Grace, and it is your name on the pocket." "It is my name," said the Duke. "Then I am sorry for it. Who pressed these?" "The drying and the pressing have been in Miss Larkham's hands since the 10th, said Garrow. He said it gently, and with real regret in it, and he did not look at her. "I say it because it will be found out in an hour, and it does no one any good for me to be delicate. She came here in some trouble. She has no cause to love this family. The ground under this shed was her grandfather's, and it was bought for £1,100 when he was in his grave. And she is a woman who has already, I am sorry to say, been at the centre of one scandal this year that I could not prevent. There was a noise in the yard, a small one, the noise of 30 people understanding something all at once. The Duke turned round and looked at her. He was very white. He said, "Cecily, tell me what you have done." That was the hour. It began at 11 o'clock on the Monday morning in the wagon yard, and it ended at 4 minutes past 12, and it was the only hour of it that ever mattered to him afterwards. "Cut the other 10, she said. "Miss Larkham." "Cut them, Mr. Prideaux. All of them, here, in the sun, and stand your men back so everyone can see the floor." They cut them. 4 were sound to the bottom. 6 had the same brown stuff a hand's depth down. She knelt on the cobbles and took a double handful out of the brown part and stood up with it. And she did not raise her voice at any point in what followed, and afterwards nobody in that yard could say that she had. "This did not come off my kiln," she said. "Here is how anybody can know it. First, she held her hand out flat to Prideaux and bent a stalk between finger and thumb. That's the strig. On a hop dried this year, it snaps like a dry twig, and the seed runs out. Bend one of these. It bends. It's soft. That's a hop that has taken the damp back for a 12-month, and there is no fire on this earth that will put that snap back into it." She took another handful from the good part and held the 2 together. "Second, smell them both. Mine have brimstone in them, because I burn a handful under every load for the first hour, and every soul in this yard has watched me do it and coughed at it. There is no brimstone in that. What there is the cheese smell, and hops get that in one way only, which is age. Third, she spread the brown stuff on her palm and rubbed it and held it up. The yellow. Rub a hop of mine, and your thumb comes away sticky and sharp, and it stays on you all day. Rub that. It's dust. It has nothing left in it at all." "That is a matter of opinion," said Garrow. "Fourth is not." She picked 1 cone out of the brown and 1 out of the bright and held them up together, and they were plainly, even to a wagoner at the back, not the same shape. There are 43 acres in bine on this ground, and every pole of it is the small round sort my grandfather planted, and this house has never grown anything else. That is a long cone with a thick strig off heavy land. It never grew on this hill. It never came in at that gate. Prideaux took the 2 cones out of her hand and looked at them for a long moment. "And 5th," she said, "turn the pockets round and read the stamp with the date on it, because I stamped every pocket that has come off this floor since the 10th, and I wrote the hour of every load in a book that has been sitting on that shelf where anybody could read it, including any man who came into this store on a Saturday with a book under his arm. 6 of those say the 16th of September. On the 16th of September, this yard had no fire in it. The cowl jammed on the 15th, and the middle kiln smoked, and there is 40 pounds of black hops lying against that wall this minute where we threw it, and every one of you was up all night, and not one pocket was pressed in this place for 2 days. Nobody said anything. Somewhere at the back, a woman began to cry and stopped herself. Prideaux said, "Then where were they pressed?" "Ask what goes on the London wagon out of the far shed after dark," said Cecily, "because it is not mine, and I have never loaded it." And then Dorcas Ferris came out from the store wall, with her bound hands held in front of her, and her face the colour of ash, and said, "I have." The yard turned round to look at her, and she flinched from it, and went on anyway. 4 nights this month. Him. She did not point. She moved her chin an inch. A shilling a time, and a shilling to say nothing, and it was pockets already stamped, out of the warm shed onto the London wagon after the yard was abed. I never knew what was in 'em, sir, but I knew there was a reason it was after dark, and I took the shilling, and I'm not going to stand here and let her have it when I know. "You will lose your money and your place," said Prideaux, "and you may be taken up as party to it." "I know what I'll lose," said Dorcas. "I've been counting it since she started talking." Garrow began to speak. He had 30 years of the borough in his voice, and he began where he always began, which was with the length of his service to the family, and how a man who had bought for the late Duke could not be supposed, and how it was a hard thing at his age to stand in a yard while a girl who had been 3 weeks in the trade. The sentence stopped. It did not finish, and it was not interrupted. He stood with his mouth open on the next word, and looked round the yard, at Tam, at Silas, at Prideaux, at the men holding the cut pockets, and he understood, some seconds before anybody said anything else, that the room had already decided, and that nothing he had ever been able to do with his voice was going to work here. He did not shout. He put his hand out and took hold of the tail of the cart, and he stood there, holding it, an ordinary elderly man in a good coat, with his hat crooked. "It has been 6 years," said Cecily. Everybody looked at her. "The price of this name has been falling 6 years, and every falling year is a year of this." I could stand here and say the rest of it, and Mr. Prideaux would write it down, and it would not be a fine and a ruined man. It would be a ship and a colony. She put the 2 handfuls of hops down on the tail of the cart, side by side, quite gently. "I've said what this year's pockets show. I'll not say another word of it, to him or to anybody, and you may all hear me say so now, so that nobody troubles to come and ask me later." "Cecily," said Garrow. "There's a coach out of Maidstone at 7, cousin," she said. Go and be an old man somewhere quiet. At 5:30 the next morning, she was in the loft of the third oast, with her box already carried down and standing at the foot of the ladder, and Silas was sitting on the top of the ladder the way he had sat the first night. "The last pocket goes on the wagon at 8, she said. That was the bargain. It was a bargain with a date in it, and the date has come. He'll not hold you to it. He doesn't have to hold me to it. I made it." She swept the hair with the flat of her hand, though it was already swept. "There's nothing to dry after Friday, Silas. That's the whole of it. There's a house up there with 11 rooms shut, and a man in it who is very kind to whoever is keeping his crop alive. And in November, there'll be no crop. Girl, no, listen, because I've had all night at it, and it comes out the same." She stopped sweeping. "Nobody sits up till 4 in the morning with a kiln because he loves the fire. He sits up because of what's over it. I've been the fire in this yard since the 10th of August, and I've been glad to be, and I'll be glad of it for years, and I'm not going to stand about in the cold end of the season finding out what a man is like when there's nothing over the fire anymore." Silas turned his hat round in his hands. "My wife died in April," he said. "I know it. 43 years. And I'll tell you what I know, that nobody wants told." He looked up at her. "You can't hear a thing said if you've decided beforehand what it was going to be. She used to say I never listened, and I always said I did. And I did, only I'd already got the answer laid out." He stood up slowly, a joint at a time. "You've got his answer laid out, and you never asked him the question." "I'm going at 8, she said. "Aye," said Silas. "Well, I'll carry your box to the gate." He came for her at 9:30 in the wagon yard, in front of Tam and Prideaux and Dorcas and 11 Londoners waiting on their money, and half the household besides, because he had been to the stable loft and to the store and to the near oast, and had found her nowhere, and had had to ask 3 people. He stopped a few feet off. Whatever he had put together on the way across the yard did not survive the crossing of it. "You said you'd not be sold twice," he said. "I've nothing to buy you with. That's what I came to say. I said the wrong thing to you in a doorway in August, and I've said the wrong thing every night since. And yesterday I stood in this yard and asked you what you'd done. Your Grace, 1 hour and 4 minutes. I have counted it since. He said your name, and I looked at you, and for 1 hour and 4 minutes I did not know. And there is nothing anybody can say to me about that hour that I have not already said." He stopped. He started again, somewhere else. "I never once came up that ladder for the hops. You came for the tally book. I never read the tally book in my life," he said. "Cecily, stay." He went down on the cobbles in front of all of them, in the wet and the trodden strig and the yellow dust, and put out his hand. She looked at it for as long as it takes a load to fall. Then she put her hand in it and pulled him up because the cobbles were filthy, and he was ridiculous, and she found she could not bear it for another second. They were married in the parish church in the 3rd week of October by a curate who kept losing his place, and the pickers had gone home by then, all but Dorcas Ferris, who stayed for it and stood at the back and cried noisily and without the least embarrassment. Mr. Prideaux's house bought the whole of the following year's crop before it was on the polls, at a price that put the 6pence back and 3pence on top of it, and said so in writing, which in Southwark is a kind of affection. Silas Pollard kept the kilns for 2 more seasons, with 2 young men under him, whom he taught by making them stand at the fire and say aloud what they could smell. And he lived to see the 3rd oast rehaired, and given a new cowl that turned as free as a weathercock. Dorcas came down every September after that, as the measurer at the bins, with the basket and the tally, and her hands were never so bad again, because there was grease in the store now, and a woman who noticed. Garrow went to a sister at Rochester. He was not prosecuted, because the only person who could have carried it further declined to open her mouth, and the trade drew its own conclusions and stopped buying through him within the year. He weighed malt for a small brewery until he was too old to weigh anything, and he wrote at Christmas, and the letters were answered civilly and briefly, and neither of them ever mentioned the shed. And on the first night of drying, every year, for a great many years, the Duke of Netherby came out of the house at about 11 o'clock, and crossed the yard, and climbed the ladder into the loft of the near oast, where his wife was on her knees at the edge of the hair, with her sleeves turned back, and where the smell was the smell she had waited all year for. He would put his head up through the hole in the floor, and stop on the 3rd rung, which was sound now, and had been for years, and put out his hand, and she would take hold of it, and pull him up, and neither of them ever once called that asking, though that is exactly what it was. Is there a smell somewhere in your life that would put you straight back into a place you have not stood in for 20 years? And if it came to you tonight, would you go? Come and sit by the fire with me again tomorrow, and we shall see whose hill it is.